Well, for this segment of our discussion, we focus on the role of Iran. Now, is Iran really the last line of resistance in the Muslim world, or is that a dangerous oversimplification? In the publication, Iran, the Final Frontier of Resistance, social justice lawyer Iqbal Suleiman argues that a war on Iran would ignite the region, redraw global alliances, and mark a turning point for Muslims worldwide. Regarding a war on Iran, well, you know what, whilst no doubt the international community, the Muslim Ummah, does not wish any further confrontation in Iran, the reality as it stands on the ground is that the US and its so-called local allies have amassed a force, and many may say that a strike on Iran may be imminent. Nonetheless, it is whatever it is, and let's unpack the discussion for this evening. We unpack the claims, the history, and the very real consequences of a war on Iran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Brother Iqbal Suleiman.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Maulana. Thank you for having me on and for inviting me.
Shukran for your time. Brother Iqbal, you frame Iran as the final frontier of resistance. I mean, what makes Iran fundamentally different from other Muslim majority states, at least in this moment in history?
Okay, so if we look at just the recent genocide in the period covering just the last 2 years, we find that the only government in the region that has been in military conflict with the Zionist regime is Iran. Then, when we look at the axis of resistance, we're talking about the Islamic resistance in Palestine, the Islamic resistance in Lebanon. All of these resistance movements have been supported not only politically, but also militarily by Iran. Iran has provided weapons to these resistance movements. Iran has supported the Palestinian struggle for liberation from its inception, from 1979. One of the first things that the Islamic government did was to cut off all political, economic, and every form of relations with both apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa. So I think that the facts on the ground speak for themselves. And I think it also helps when we consider the words of Ash-Shaheed, the martyr Salah al-Aruri, who was the first high-ranking martyr during the period of the genocide. When he said that he's speaking as a Palestinian, and his words were that the most hostile government to Israel was Islamic Iran. And then when you compare it with the governments in the surrounding areas, the Gulf governments, all of the Arab governments, some of them have openly colluded with Israel. They've helped maintain the siege. They've had clandestine intelligence relations with Israel. They did absolutely nothing to support the Palestinians. Some of them might express verbal support, but it hasn't translated to any support on the ground. In fact, when we look at what happens on the ground, most of them have colluded with the Israeli government.
Iqbal, at the same token, of course, whilst we are discussing Iran's interaction with the Palestinian resistance, and there can be no doubt that when it comes to evidence, Iran has been supportive, not just of the of Hamas currently right now, but even of the PLO in the days gone by. I'm talking about the days of Yasser Arafat in the 80s. He no doubt, even although it might have been a more secular regime than what the current Hamas is, by way of its makeup, he also acknowledged support from Iran, the Islamic resistance of Iran post 1979. There's also this criticism of Iran, and it's from two parts. One is of Iran's role in supporting proxies whose targets were not necessarily the Zionist state, but other Muslims. I mean, I'm referring to Iraq, post the American invasion of Iraq, and groups that were allegedly supported by Iran that targeted and went after Sunni populations. Syria, similar story. I mean, with regards to Iranian-backed proxies. I mean, if you could answer that, Iran's role in the region in general, besides, of course, its interaction with Zionist Israel.
Yeah, I think your question presents a very complex question. I'm not going to be able to answer every aspect of it in detail because you cover a very wide geography. But perhaps, very briefly, so when we look at, for instance, Syria, right? The West has framed it as that of a Sunni Shi'i type of a conflict. And there's no doubt we hold a view that the Assad government was an oppressive government. It was a despotic government. But when we look at the framing of that conflict and who was involved in the conflict, right? There's something that is beyond dispute that you saw the intelligence agencies from both the Americans and the Israelis militarizing that conflict. This can be proved by the record. There is an email from the State Department to Hillary Clinton where it was stated very clearly that Al-Qaeda and Nusra Front is fighting on our side. That means the American side in Syria. So you're correct to say that, yes, as a government, it would be looking at its own internal interests, but when we're looking at a conflict dealing with colonialism and imperialism, when we talk about colonialism, we're talking about the Zionist occupation of Palestine, and we're talking about the American empire and their interests, there's no doubt that groups like Al-Nusra Front were financed and supported by the Americans and the Israelis, and this is what supported the Israeli objective. They want a weak Syria. If you look at what has happened to Syria now, Syria has been almost balkanized. You have internecine conflict. You had a civil war. Even after you have the new administration in Syria, which expressed that it was willing to talk and have a good relationship with Israel, you still had the Israelis going and bombing Syria. So I think the one fact that one shouldn't lose sight of is that Israel wants to be the dawn in the Middle East. They want every other government to be subservient to them. And the point that I'm making is what you have with the Iranian government, it is the one government that refuses to be subservient to both the Israelis and the Americans. And that's the reason why you have the planned war against Iran, because you have a government there that won't bow down and that won't allow their natural resources to be used by the Americans, and that makes it very clear that they will keep on supporting the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And that's what it comes down to. If tomorrow Iran says that, look, we'll have economic relations with Israel, we'll have diplomatic relations with Israel, we won't support the Palestinian resistance, Iran would be acceptable. Iran could take the role that Turkey does. I mean, you have the leadership in Turkey that verbalizes support for the Palestinians, but at the same time has had, through the years, you look at the history, even under Erdogan, they've had relations with the Israelis. Of course, now they've taken some steps to cut economic and political relations with them, but Iran has been consistent when it comes to not having any relations with Israel. and, staying that particular course.
Correct. Iran from 1979 onwards, the current regime has been consistent in that regard. Coming also away from the conflict, the Zionist-Iranian conflict, speaking about Iran as a country itself, I mean, within the country, there has been political dissent. Now, granted, it's obvious that much of that political dissent has been harvested by Israeli agents from within. I mean, that's a given. But there's also been criticism against the Iranian regime over the years of them having a strong hand against their minority population, especially their Sunni population in the southeast. And we're referring to Zaidan province in particular that borders Balochistan in Pakistan. It's a volatile area. It's one of the most volatile areas in the world currently. But these type of internal issues can certainly not be ignored by the Muslim Ummah, that you have internal conflicts within you that you need to manage better. The stance on Iran and Zionism, I think, has been pretty clear for the world to see. They've worn it on their shoulders, on their sleeves. But within Iran itself, your comments, brother Iqbal, on how they've managed their internal minority populations.
So I think when you look at the Iranian population, it's very diverse, right? So yes, to answer your question, firstly, there is opposition to the government. But Iran has presidential elections every 4 years. And you would see that in their parliament, there's representation for all what quote-unquote religious minorities, from Jewish people to Sunni groups to Christians. All of them are represented in its government. Now, the important thing is when you look at how the media frames the language, you'd find that in the mainstream media there's constant reference to Iran as a regime. Now, when you refer to a country as a regime, it's an attempt to delegitimize it. And this is a very important issue, because when we look at elections, let's say the last elections in 2024, you had approximately 30 million people, 30 million Iranians voting. And yes, you correct that you have a significant number of people that are opposed to the government, but that doesn't translate anywhere near to a majority of the people. Because even in the last elections, which analysts say was amongst the lowest voter turnouts, you had almost 49 to 50% of the electorate voting. So the point that I'm making is that, yes, while there are, like any country, you would have divisions, but you have elections that take place every 4 years. And when you hear the Western media referring to the government as a regime, it distorts the reality, because we talk about the 2024 elections where there was approximately almost 50% of the people voting. That's almost 30 million people voting. And now, if you look at it logically, what the Americans and the Israelis are saying, that they're going to use bombs against ballots, because you have people who are voting, who have voted for a government that support the government's positions. And yes, while there are, there's these differences, there are other reports that one could go into details which speak about the freedom of expression that all religious minorities have in Iran.
Brother Iqbal, in conclusion, Iran, the final frontier of resistance. How could we get a copy on it? I mean, how could you promote this book? We have a minute or two on air. How could you how could one, purchase a copy and study it? And of course, study it with an open mind and give you feedback.
Sure. It's been published by the Muslim Views. It's also published by the Media Review Network. It's accessible free of charge. And yeah, it's accessible to everyone.
Iqbal, Suleiman, shukran, jazakumullah khairan for coming online and discussing Iran, the final frontier of resistance, and of course, what the role of Iran in the Palestinian struggle and the rights for Palestinian liberation. And shukran for your time, Brother Iqbal.
Jazakallah khair, Mulana. Jazakallah for inviting me and giving me time on air. And may Allah's peace and blessings be with you and with the listeners and with all of the oppressed people around the world.
Ameen. Iqbal Suleiman, author and compiler of Iran, the Final Frontier of Resistance.